Tom Bombadil is by far one of the most enigmatic characters in the Lord of the Rings mythos, with plenty of theories concerning his origins and the nature of his being. In today's episode, we'll discuss his history, explore these theories, and try and interpret Tolkien's thoughts behind this character. Now I'll be skimming through his history, and it will seem like I've omitted many details. However, this is because I'll be using them as evidence and arguments when discussing Tom Bombadil's theories, and so I'd rather mention them once later instead of repeating myself. So when the Hobbits first leave the Shire, they decide to pass through the old forest on their way to Bree. Here they encounter a great willow tree called Old Man Willow. The tree was filled with anger and hate, and it casts a spell on the hobbits that causes them to feel sleepy. It then traps Merry and Pippin, and though they attempt to free them, Sam and Frodo are unable to do so. They then hear Tom Bombadil singing, and they run towards him asking for help. He frees the hobbits by singing a song to Old Man Willow, which causes him to loosen his grip on them. Tom Bombadil then takes them to his hut, located near the borders of the Witty-Windle River. Here he introduces them to his wife, Goldberry, who is said to be the River Daughter, and the hobbits then spend 2 days at Tom's hut before they continue on their journey. However, once again, misfortune befalls them as they get lost and end up in the Barrow Downs. They're kidnapped by a Barrow Wight who prepares to sacrifice them, but Frodo then sings a song that Bombadil had told them to sing if they run into trouble, and he soon hears Bombadil singing back before the roof of the tomb is broken open, and Tom banishes the Wight away. He rescues the hobbits before escorting them to the borders of his country, and then bids them farewell. Now Tom Bombadil was said to be taller than a hobbit, and yet shorter than a man, which would make him around 4.5 to 5 feet tall. He wore an old battered hat with a long blue feather stuck in its band, and a blue coat and great yellow boots. His eyes were described as being blue and bright, and his face was adorned with many wrinkles of glee and laughter. He also had a long brown beard, and he would often burst into song. And yet, for such a simplistic, cheery character, he's got quite a few deep, profound theories. Some of the more popular theories suggest that he was a Valar or Maiar spirit, who were angelic-like beings in Middle-earth. Others believe that he was a nature spirit, or perhaps the embodiment of Eru Ilúvatar, the one true god of Arda. He could also have been the embodiment of the music of the Ainur, or that of the land itself. And finally, some believe that he could have been a representation of Tolkien. So now we're going to discuss these one by one, while looking at arguments in favor and against them, to try and eliminate some of them, or at least organize them in order of likelihood. So on to our first theory, that of him being one of the Valar. This theory is encouraged by several quotes, such as Elrond saying that Tom is oldest and fatherless. Earlier in the books, Tom himself says, "Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends." Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. This tells us that he was one of the first, if not the first being to walk Middle-earth, since he was there before the other Valar, including Melkor, the first Dark Lord, had even reached it. When the hobbits are in his hut, Tom tells Frodo to show him the ring, and he then puts it on his finger, though it doesn't turn him invisible. The ring has no effect on him at all, and he could even see Frodo clearly, when later on, Frodo puts on the ring and turns invisible. This would encourage the idea that he was one of the Valar, a being of immense power, and yet this theory falls short in several aspects. First of all, there's Tom's complete lack of interest in the world apart from nature, and his bizarre image, they wouldn't seem fitting for one of the Valar or complement their character. Secondly, in the Book of Lost Tales we're told, "Now swiftly as they fared, Melkor was there before them." This is in regards to the Valar's entry into Middle-earth, and it tells us that Melkor, one of the Valar and the first Dark Lord, was the first of the Valar to enter the world of Arda. This makes it impossible that Bombadil was one of the Valar, unless he was Melkor himself, which would be very far-fetched. Now, to be fair, the Book of Lost Tales isn't considered as canon as the Silmarillion. However, since it's never contradicted or changed, I think we can safely say that it's what Tolkien had in mind. The next theory is quite similar to the previous one, but instead of saying that Tom Bombadil was one of the Valar, it believes that he could have been a Maiar spirit. These spirits were servants of the Valar, and they too were very powerful beings. Some think that Bombadil could have been one of them, and that perhaps he entered Middle-earth before the Valar as a Maiar being. Now for this theory, I feel that there are aspects to it that don't add up. For example, when the Valar entered Middle-earth, I feel it's a bit anticlimactic if a Maiar being got there before them. If anything, I'd expect them to have followed the Valar, since they were below them in the power hierarchy, and they served them in a way. Apart from my own opinion, there's also a more well-founded reason, that we know of other Maiar beings such as Gandalf and Saruman, and both of these were susceptible to the ring's corruption and its power, and so it would seem odd how the ring had no effect on Tom Bombadil, assuming he was a Maiar spirit just like them. For me, it suggests that he was a separate entity entirely. The next theory is that Tom Bombadil could have been the embodiment of Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Arda, and this is actually quite a popular one. Eru Ilúvatar lived in the Timeless Halls, an area beyond the boundaries of Arda, and some believe that perhaps Tom Bombadil was his physical embodiment in the world. Apart from the fact that the ring had no effect on him, there's a quote which plays quite a big part in this theory. When the Hobbits are in Tom Bombadil's hut, Frodo asks Goldberry who Tom Bombadil is. "He is," said Goldberry. "He is, as you have seen him," she said in answer to his look. "He is the master of wood, water, and hill." This is often compared to a biblical passage when Moses meets God and asks him who he is, and God replies, "I am who I am." Considering Tolkien's religious background, some felt that this could be a hint at Bombadil being Eru Ilúvatar. However, this theory was later dismissed by Tolkien himself in one of his letters. In letter 181, he says, "There is no embodiment of the One, of God, who indeed remains remote outside the world, and only directly accessible to the Valar or rulers." And this is again mentioned in letter 153, for those of you who want to check it out. From this we know that Eru Ilúvatar did not have any embodiment whatsoever in Middle-earth, thus putting this theory to rest. Before moving on to the last theory, I want to quickly cover a minor one which is brought up from time to time, that Tom Bombadil perhaps represents Tolkien, that this is why he remembers the first raindrop and acorn, the first rivers and trees, why he was first and fatherless, because he was Tolkien, the creator of the world of Middle-earth, and so none of it existed before him. This would also explain why he was said to be the master. Now this theory concerns more what Tom Bombadil represents rather than what he is, and so I feel it's more appropriate to counter it with a similar argument, that Tolkien wrote the following about Tom Bombadil in letter 144. "But if you have, as it were taken, a vow of poverty, renounced control, and take your delight in things for themselves without reference to yourself, watching, observing, and to some extent knowing, then the question of the rights and wrongs of power and control might become utterly meaningless to you, and the means of power quite valueless. It is a natural, pacifist view, which arises in the mind when there is a war. I feel that, through Bombadil, Tolkien wanted to show his appreciation for a pacifist character, one that works hand in hand with nature and appreciates the simplicity of life, without concerning himself with ownership. Considering this, I'd rather see Bombadil as representing qualities that meant a lot to Tolkien, rather than being the embodiment of Tolkien himself in his novel. And now for my favourite, and in my opinion the most plausible theory. Now this is actually two theories that I feel are very entwined with one another, and so I'll be treating them as such. These theories say that Tom Bombadil is the personification of the music of the Ainur, or that of the world itself. And this is my favourite theory, as it seems to tie in everything extremely well. So the music of the Ainur is what created the world of Arda, which is why it ties in with Bombadil representing the world itself. I also like to think that it's why Bombadil has such an affinity for singing, because it's what created him in the first place. It would also explain why he was there before the rivers, trees, the first raindrop, and acorn, cause he was the world itself, from the first aspect of its being. This again would fit in with how he was present before the coming of the Valar, and how he was unaffected by the ring. During the Council of Elrond, the following is said about Tom Bombadil. It seems that he has a power even over the ring. No, I should not put it so, said Gandalf. Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master, but he cannot alter the ring itself, nor break its power over others. Again, this seems to imply that his power was over nature and the natural being of things. During this very conversation, Erestor, an elf, suggests that perhaps Bombadil could be used as a guardian for the ring. However, Gandalf dismisses this idea, saying that Bombadil would not understand the need, and if he were given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would be a most unsafe guardian. There seems to be a degree of dissociation from understanding the peril they were in from Tom's side, that he was there simply as a being and not an agent of change. Gandalf later described him as a moss gatherer, which is quite appropriate considering this character trait. The following is another quote about Bombadil that suggests that he was the embodiment of the world. Power to defy our enemy is not in him, unless such power is in the earth itself. Obviously, one must take note of the last few words, unless such power is in the earth itself. Another quote which helps this theory is, "If all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first, and the night shall come." From this I understand that once all the being and life on Middle-earth are conquered, then finally Tom Bombadil, who represents the world itself, would fall, which I don't believe is a mere coincidence. Another point of interest is that after the ring is destroyed, Gandalf decides to spend some time with Bombadil, and he says that Bombadil would be not much interested in anything that we have done or seen, unless perhaps in our visit to the Ents. I feel this is another connection to nature that Bombadil has, which gives further value to this theory. One can't forget his command over Old Man Willow, or even when he freed the Hobbits from the Barrow-wights, we're told there was a loud rumbling sound, as of stones rolling and falling, and suddenly light streamed in. I can't imagine him just pushing all those stones away. I feel it's more plausible that he had control over them, though this is just my own speculation. There is also Goldberry's quote, that he is the master of wood, water and hill. And another quote that says, "And it seemed as if, under the spell of his words, the wind had gone, and the clouds had dried up, and the day had been withdrawn." Both of these emphasize a control over nature. Now there was one thing that bothered me with this theory at first, and it was that Tom Bombadil only seemed to have control over the Old Forest and not the entirety of Middle-earth. We see this in the following quotes. Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders. And Tom is not master of riders from the Black Land, far beyond his country. And at first glance I thought that this could discredit this theory a bit, but then I looked deeper and I actually think it complements it instead of contradicting it. And there is one quote which salvages it all. And now he is withdrawn into a little land, within bounds that he has set, though none can see them, waiting perhaps for a change of days, and he will not step beyond them. And from this, what I feel is most important is when we're told that he withdrew into his current land. Withdrawing implies that with time he decreased his area of influence and decided to settle in the Old Forest. And I think this fits really well with the idea that the natural state of the world had changed. That with time, men, elves, dwarfs, and the evil powers in Middle-earth changed and shaped the land to suit them better. And the natural order of things was set back, and the land changed according to the whim of the new settlers. And so, if Tom Bombadil represents the music of the Ainur, the uncorrupted, pure, and simple idea of the initial world, would it not be fitting that he slowly regresses to occupy an area that is yet unchanged or untainted by the hands of others, the Old Forest? I also feel that this fits in well with another detail concerning Tom, that each faction, dwarves, elves, men, and hobbits, all had their own unique name for him, and I do think it would be a bit far-fetched if they all met him in the Old Forest. However, what if hundreds, if not thousands of years before, he was present in a larger area of land, and would therefore come into contact with these different factions more easily, leaving a unique impact on them all. Before ending this video, I'd like to point out that it's believed that the inspiration behind Tom Bombadil was a Dutch doll that Tolkien's son owned. And in one of Tolkien's letters that predated The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien described Goldberry as the season changes in nature, while Tom represented the spirit of the vanishing Oxford countryside. I'd also like to end this video with a quote from one of Tolkien's letters, letter 144, where he says that, "And even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one, intentionally." Considering this, I think we're never meant to find out what Tom Bombadil truly was. And so, the best we can do is speculate. I hope you enjoyed this video, friends. If you did, drop a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the wonderful world and lore of Middle-earth.